What's going on, guys? It's Jordan de Jong here, and today I want to go through the full due diligence checklist that I did on my most recent purchase. Hopefully this will give you some insight into some of the things you should do before making the biggest financial decision of your life. These are very different times that we are currently in, and it makes it a little bit hard to take recent statistics as true representation of what the current state of the market is. Although all statistics should be taken as a grain of salt anyway, as you are the one buying an individual property on one street, in one suburb, in one city, in one state. I'll be zooming in on just this particular asset that I purchased, rather than the thought process behind it, my portfolio, and the diversification strategy play that I did. So if you haven't watched that one already and you want to learn more about it, you can watch my 2 previous videos up here on how we put that strategy together. In this video, we'll be delving into the statistics side of things, what I looked out for in the area, such as the local market, local economy, the livability, and then analyze supply separately. In the next video, I'll also be delving into the cash flow numbers that give you a high level analysis of what it would cost to hold. There were some pretty interesting results that came through while doing the actual due diligence on the physical dwelling, and I think you guys will get a ton out of them too, and understand how to deal with certain situations that may arise when you're making a rushed decision. But I'll cover those in the next video too. I guess that's another big point. Never feel rushed to do your due diligence. Give yourself plenty of time to review and analyze what it is that you're actually purchasing. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have an A-team around you to help you make the best decision that you can. For this purchase in particular, my A-team consisted of 5 main parties, excluding myself, made up of a mortgage broker, an accountant, a conveyancer, a buyer's agent, and someone in my family with great knowledge of the local area. Now you may be thinking, well, I'm always going to use a mortgage broker or a lender broker and a conveyancer anyway, so that's kind of cheating. Well, this is where choosing the particular people to work with is so important. It would have been much easier for me just to use the conveyancer that I had used multiple times before. However, they are based out of Melbourne and I was purchasing in Sydney, so by using a conveyancer that's worked in a specific area for decades, they may be able to pick up on some things that others wouldn't have. Recently, I've refinanced all of my loans with a new mortgage broker, and essentially it all started with him. Without restructuring, pulling out equity, and putting a mortgage strategy together, I might not have been able to borrow the amount of money that I did, specifically during this COVID season. Having multiple entities I could have purchased under, including my name, my wife's name, both our names, 2 different trust structures, and even a company, it was essential to get some advice from an accountant, not only for this purchase specifically, but to help set up for future purchases. Again, with my buyer's agent, because I don't know the area and don't have my boots on the ground, but statistically the location stacked up, it was essential for me to engage someone with critical information about the location. And essentially they had grown up in the area and know the little pockets like the back of their hand. This is critical to acquire some insider information. You want to know the walking tracks, the cut-through paths to the local milk bar, if there's any social housing in the area, what the vibe the area has, who's living there, does the location have some stigma, what type of cafes and restaurants are opening that might indicate a gentrification. This is critical to acquire some insider information. You want to know the walking tracks, the cut-through paths to local milk bar, if there's any social housing in the area, what vibe the area has, who's living there, does the location have a stigma, what type of cafes and restaurants are opening that might be an indication of gentrification. And last but definitely not least, my grandparents have lived in the eastern suburbs of Sydney for the last 50 years, and my mum has recently just moved back there. So not only was I getting some great reassurance from my buyer's agent, but I could ask someone with area-specific questions from people that I trust and don't necessarily come with any property biases. I guess the biggest catch-all here when selecting someone to work with is to just not choose the closest professional and presume that they'll have your best interest at heart. Try and work off a recommendation from someone that you know personally. Do some thorough research on them and check reviews on all online platforms that you can find. Sorry to bang on about the A-team for so long, but I think that's the most important element to do your due diligence checklist, as I'd much rather pay a professional for great advice than try and do it all of myself. Anyway, let's delve into some statistics, but before we do, don't forget to smash that like button. Okay, so instead of editing my videos for hours and hours on end and taking screenshots of all these separate websites and putting them on the video, I thought I'd just jump onto my computer and we can delve into them here. Okay, so I have got all of the tabs saved across the top, so hopefully we can get through it pretty quickly. I don't want this video to drag on for too long because I can talk about this stuff for hours and days and years and so on. So, generally what I'm gonna do is just run through everything that's happening on the right-hand side here in this Excel. I generally like to write every single thing down. However, I have got a whole sort of algorithm that runs in the background and puts these numbers together and, you know, sort of has targets and what you're comparing them against, and then, you know, comes up with the score that's gonna provide you what bit of an accuracy around supply and demand in all of these areas. However, I'm just gonna run through them today and run through the demand like of local market, local economy, and livability, and then the supply side of things too, and just where I look and where I get these statistics, because I'm actually planning to start a business behind this called Game Plans, as you may know, which is gonna give you all of those scores when I do my property planning service for you. So essentially I'm gonna run through where I get these statistics from and how to look at this certain sorts of data. So first and foremost, I always write down, you know, what is the address? Obviously, we're just gonna look at the Botany area today because I'm not telling you what specific property I purchased, but you know, what sort of price range, the beds, the cars, the bath, the floor space, the land size, the year built, and the type. Now, I think in all the websites that I'm going to show you today, you can actually find all of these statistics. Obviously, the more that you have, the better, because we did buy a unit. Obviously, we're not going to have the exact land size, but if you can find it, the better off you are. That way, when you're doing comparable sales and looking for different things and different statistics in the area, you can identify really quickly what is sort of comparable and what sort of matches with what you're after. So first and foremost, it's always comparable sales. You need to see what's being sold in the area, what is currently selling in the area, and just break down what's been happening really in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. I wouldn't go any further back than that. I mean, it's good to see what's happened really historically, but you want a really relevant and localized data. And when I say localized data, you want to get the best properties and comparables that you can find, you know, in the same apartment block, on the same street, in the same vicinity. You don't want to, you know, even different areas within suburbs are completely different. You know, when you're buying a property, you're buying one property on one street in one area, in one suburb, in one state. So, you know, whatever you can find in particular as a comparable sale, the better off you are, and the more you can find, the better off you're going to be. My favorite site to use is Price Finder. Essentially, they've got this sort of suburb flyover where you can see all the sales growth, which we'll go through in later detail, and it breaks down the years here as well. But they have this really nice little section called recent sales, and this essentially just breaks down all of the recent sales in the area. Obviously, there's no filtering criteria here because it is a suburb flyover, but you can find a way to do that through this platform as well. So obviously not everyone is paying for Price Finder, and if you do need to find some free services that do offer you some comparable sales or where you can look for them, the two main ones is obviously realestate.com and Domain. So essentially, if you jump onto those two platforms, you can search for your area, you can go to the sold section and look for the properties in that specific area and do some filtering around, you know, unit type, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, all that sort of stuff. So essentially that's what I've done here. We're filtering out the Botany area. I've got some filters around a 1-bedroom apartment and unit. So essentially that's, you know, as close as you can zoom into the comparable sales as you need to. And this is why it's so critical to get really similar properties as comparables, because if I start scrolling down through here, you'll see some really different numbers. You know, the first one is 475, then we jump to 670, and you know, this is a 1-1 without a car space, and this is a 1-1-1 with a car space. So how can you compare those two properties? It's, you know, $200,000 difference. It's pretty ridiculous. So that's why it's so essential to get the right comparable sales and do your due diligence in that way. But this is why I kind of really like this area, because, you know, there are properties or 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartments selling for, you know, that sort of price range. Obviously I bought an older building, but my way of thinking is, you know, in 30 years time, if they're both going to be old buildings, so they're both going to be sort of valued at the same amount of level. I mean, obviously, you know, this property may have better views and that's why they're getting a better price range, but that's the way I think about it. So yeah, that's essential. Go in there, really delve deep, and that's why it's critical to have these numbers on the right hand side. So when you are scrolling through these properties, you can really delve in and sort of see, okay, well, this is a 93 meter squared. Yep, mine's 81, might be a bit too big as a comparable sale, and do all that sort of stuff. And when you do find these properties, like this first one would be probably pretty similar to my one, I would just jump in there, copy the link and save it somewhere, and then you're pretty good going from there. So essentially, yeah, that's the way to do it. Same with Domain. And on Domain, I've actually done the buy filter here, so you can do, you know, buy, sold, or rent. And essentially I do the buy filter, and I go through every property that's actually still on for sale and what sort of price range they're going for. This is obviously a little bit higher because they actually haven't sold yet, but you can sort of see what prices are, or asking prices vendors are asking for in the market. The next thing we've got on the list here is number of times sold, and Domain actually provide a pretty good service for this at the moment. It's called Property History. You can go to just domain.com.au/property profile, and essentially it's going to give you all of the history for that specific property. This isn't the property that I purchased, however, it's just an example to go through. And essentially it gives you both all of the sold history and the rental history as well. So, you know, you can say this property rented here for October for $650 per week, and it's sold in June the same year for $634,000. So, interesting here that the prices are known as a private treaty that's sold. Very interesting to see. But essentially, this is great. It gives you that breakdown. Essentially, for me, you can view more results here, which is pretty good. And it goes back all the way to 2015, which is probably when this property was first purchased. Essentially, what you're looking for here is, I don't like a property that sells more than once every 10 years. I think if it's selling all the time, then there may be something wrong with it. People are trying to offload it. It's not working well as an investment, all those sorts of things. So I essentially look for really, sort of 60s, 70s buildings, haven't been sold for ages. Normally really want, one owner that's been there for the whole time and essentially loved the property over those years. But yeah, that's essential there. This property to me would raise some red flags. So the next thing that we've got on the list is rental listings. And I do exactly the same thing with rentals as I do for sold purchases. So if you are looking to purchase an investment property and you are planning to rent it out, obviously the biggest indicator is if it's currently being rented out, how much it's being rented out for. When was the last time they got a price increase? When was the last time the tenants changed hands? All that sort of stuff. That's really critical research and understanding of what's actually going on there. But the second thing that I do is exactly the same thing as I do for the solds. But I'll just filter out for rent. So if we go back to domain here, you can just switch this to rent and see results. And there you go. There you can see, what's for rent, what sort of rental price they're looking for, all that sort of stuff. There are plenty of websites out there that sort of give you an average rental return and all that sort of stuff, but I think this is more specific because you can do those exact comparables as we showed before, age of building, location, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's really critical when it comes down to searching for rental properties. All right, if we jump into the demand side of things now, the first thing that I like to look at is the local market, and the first thing we look at is the auction clearance rates. Now, obviously being in a very different environment at the moment, we can't take auction clearance rates as a grain of salt, and I mean, there's been a ban on auctions recently, so a lot of recent statistics you can't really take into consideration. But when you are looking for auction clearance rates, there's plenty of websites that do it. One of the good ones is realestate.com.au, and essentially they give you this sort of auction results, and you can break it down into that suburb area. So this is New South Wales clearance rate. This is actually last weekend, but I would be doing it for whenever you're purchasing the property. Look at the last couple of months and just see what's happening there. Essentially, it's going to give you the properties withdrawn and passed in. Very funny, but still they're reporting a 75% clearance rate. So well, maybe they're taking this withdrawn as it actually cleared at auction, who knows. But yeah, essentially that's where you want to find the clearance rates, and you want to look for some strong clearance rates. You don't want places where properties aren't. Clearance rates really demonstrate how hot the market is. So if properties are selling all the time, constantly, and it's kind of hard to break it down to a suburb level as well, because essentially, if for this example there are only 4 properties selling, so imagine if one of those properties only sold, then it would be reporting a 25% auction clearance rate, which looks really bad statistically. So take everything as a grain of salt. Do the suburb one, do the New South Wales one, do the state level one, and just see how that associates with each other. Vendor discounting is the next one, guys, and essentially you can only do this by looking at the exact property that you're purchasing and doing those comparable sales. So looking at the last 6 to 12 months worth of comparable sales, seeing what they sold for and what price points they're sitting at, and then looking at your particular property and saying, okay, well, how much is this being discounted by? That's what I think. And a lot of people call this under market value and all that sort of stuff, but essentially it is just vendor discounting, like what the market should essentially pay for the property and what the vendor's willing to take for it. And you don't actually know that total figure until you do the actual sums, but you can do it on other properties in a specific area as well. Next one, guys, is website search numbers. So essentially what we're looking for here is how much interaction there are in particular websites. Now, I like this realestate.com.au/neighborhoods. It gives you sort of a breakdown of the actual area that you're looking at. Obviously, in this one, we're looking at botany, but it gives you sort of this house, unit, and then the trend, so how they've performed over time. This is quite similar to that Price Finder one, essentially, but it's going only back to 1919. Let's just see if we go to an annual basis here. Yeah, so it's only really going back to 2011, it looks like, which is not too bad. But yeah, this is the big one here. This is the average demand market, and as you can see here, there's 359 visits per property against 1,600 visits per property. Now, I don't know if this is actually clicked. Actually, let's have a look at how this was calculated. Supply and demand data from demand is calculated the average number of visits per listing per month over a 12 months to realestate.com/buy. Yeah, so essentially this is clicks onto the website. So yeah, pretty interesting here. I don't really like these statistics. Obviously, there's not a lot of people looking in Botany compared to the average of New South Wales, but you want to at least sort of be average there, and you know, or more. You want people wanting to buy in that area. You want a high demand of people looking for properties in that area. I don't know if this is, you know, recent data compared to, I mean, it says June 2019 to May 2020. So the coronavirus may not have an impact on these statistics, but yeah, it's pretty interesting to delve into and sort of see where that demand is. Next, we jump into the local economy and we look at the average income. So I love SQM research for this. They do a really good demographic breakdown, and essentially this is exactly what I want to be looking at. So this is under demographics. You want to look for weekly family income and have your postcode or suburb put in here. So essentially what we are looking for, and this is a pretty strong indicator, is a high level of family income coming into their postcode. So this lighter green, lighter blue is the postcode that you're searching for, and the darker blue is the state or the region that you're looking at. And essentially here, you know, we can see that the family income in Botany is $2,447 compared to the New South Wales average of $1,780. And this is what you like to see. You like to see your local area growing quicker than the New South Wales income. And essentially what that means is higher income families are actually moving into that area, and that's where you want to be. You want to be in that wealth zone. You want to be in that place where people, higher income families are moving into and essentially paying more for properties. That's the theory anyway. The next thing we look at is historical growth. Now there's a few things that I do look at here. I do like to go back to that price finder initial suburb flyover with the quick charts at the front here. This gives you some really good history all the way back to 1992, which was the year I was born. It was a great year. But essentially you can see how the median price has increased over time and quite dramatically. And what I like to see about this one is you can see where it's really kicked up and kind of overvalued. So what's happened here is there's been a really big rush up, and it's kind of gotten overvalued, and it's been stagnant over the last 3 years. So that gives me some pretty good confidence to say, I mean, obviously we had the APRA close down and the coronavirus, which has kind of slowed down the market completely. But that shows to me that I'm not paying, you know, this sort of premium top price here. I feel like the market is quite stagnant, and it's due to eventually come up over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. So that's a really good indication there as well. And then if you scroll down again, it breaks it down to the level thing. So if we go down to the bottom, you can see the most recent years, and you know, 2020, 2019, 2018, we can sort of see that slowdown. Again, if you don't have Price Finder, there are plenty of websites that give you this sort of information. Another one that you can possibly use is Smart Property Investment, and do like a suburb analysis here. You can type in your explore suburbs, and you can go to Botany. It gives you a unit and a house breakdown, but essentially they give you these statistics here as well, which is, you know, the median 12 months, -4%, the median 3 years, -6%, and median five years, you know, 3.22%. The next one, guys, is owner-occupier type. So this is where there's a certain amount of renters in the area and then a certain amount of owner-occupiers, and you do want more owner-occupiers. Essentially, owner-occupiers look after their house, they mow their lawn, they keep things clean, where renters supposedly don't, or they don't look after it as much as owner-occupiers do. Again, the argument with the renters as well is obviously if it's being rented, it's an investment, and so what happens is the market crashes, like during COVID-19, like all of these doomsayers are predicting. Essentially, you know, if all of those had to foreclose on their mortgages, they'd have to all sell their properties at the same time, and that means that there's more stock on market, and your property's going to get devalued because all of these investors in the same area are all selling their properties. So a good place I like to look at this again is SQM research. So this is the same demographics sheet that you look at, and the graph is occupant type here. Again, you put your postcode in and it'll break it down for you. But yeah, this gives you a good breakdown of how many owner-occupiers and mortgage holders. So owner-occupiers and mortgage holders are together. Owner-occupiers are essentially they own outright. Mortgage holders are the ones that own the property but are mortgaging it out. And then the renters are 30%, 34%. So essentially, I do like to look for areas with less than 30% owner-occupiers. And a good another indication of this is again that sort of building profile. If you are looking in a strata building, you do want to have that sort of 30% rented or less, and essentially that means you're just not overexposed. If this building had 100% renters in there and the market was to crash and every single property was to go on the market, then you'd be in a little bit of trouble. Next up, guys, we are looking at population growth, and essentially we're back in SQM research in the same little demographics thing, and we're looking at the annualized population change. And essentially this does the same thing as the income. It compares the local area population growth compared to the state or the suburb, or the state, not the suburb. But essentially, yeah, exactly the same thing here. You're looking for more population moving into the area. What that could be an indication of though, and essentially this is probably what's happening here, is there's a ton of new residential buildings being built, and essentially which is giving a ton more housing and a ton more people are actually moving into the area. So it's pretty interesting to see the decrease here in 2011. That might be when they were building or planning to build all these big buildings, so everyone was getting kicked out, and now everyone's moved in again. So essentially you do want more people moving into the area. That means there's good strong demand, but you don't want too much, and you gotta obviously understand what is happening in the area to understand what these statistics actually mean. And as I said, specifically for Botany, I think it's just a big build up of all of those brand new apartments, which I'd never recommend investing in, but essentially all of the people are moving into that area. Next up is employment, and I love economy.id.com.au. Essentially you go here and then you have to find your local council, and then they give you some pretty cool statistics about the local economy. But essentially you're looking for employment here. So the population of the Bayside area, or Bayside Council I think it is 178,000. Local jobs is 103,000, and employed residents is 96,000. So when you compare the employed residents compared to the population, it's pretty concerning there. Like there's not a big percentage of employed residents compared to that local population, and it's pretty interesting to see what that actually means, and you kind of do want to have a stronger number there. But again, you can see the total amount of GDP and how much that generates. And again, when I speak about employment, what you are looking for there is it's just not one industry reliant. So you don't want to buy in like just a mining town that if mining was to stop tomorrow, then there's no employment there and people don't want to move into that area. Another really good one for that is microburbs. Essentially this gives you a whole ton of different really cool scores, and breaks down the area and all these different things. You can look for blending applications, gives you a HIP score, gives you a family score, and all of these things have some really cool information in it. So if you want to check it out, definitely do that. But if we scroll down to this local government area and we go into the business, it kind of breaks down all of these industries and how many people or what percentage of people actually work in these areas. So, transport and warehousing is 15%, rental hire is 13%, construction is 13%, and so on. It just breaks it down like that. So essentially you don't want to, have one of these businesses be like 50, 60, 70% of the total employment in that area, because that it is one industry reliant. Government spending is another good thing, guys. It's pretty hard to see what is actually happening with government spending, but essentially what you want to do is you can jump into this planning alerts. You can put in your area or your street or anywhere that you bought. I haven't bought in Bay Street, but it's just very close, so I thought I'd put it in as an example. But essentially this gives you a breakdown of all the planning that's happening in the area. So who's spending what, who's doing what, modification on two-story dwelling and converted awning, and this is really good to see if anything is happening like literally next door. Like you can see, oh well, if I buy this property and then in 2 months time they're going to start a brand new building and they're going to be in construction for 18 months, that's going to be a pain. So this is a really good way to see what is actually going on and analyze what's happening in the area and who's spending what. But again, there is infrastructure.gov.au, and this gives you a good breakdown of some of the government spending that is happening in the area. So I just type in the location there, and then I scroll through, and then I find anything that might be relevant. So like this Port Botany rail line projects reconsidered as a pro. So I just delve in. If you've got like half an hour or so, just delve into some of the things that are happening here and see what government spending is coming through. Next thing is vacancy rates. So back to SQM research. Now the vacancy rates has its own sort of graph. It's not in that demographics anymore. So you want to jump into vacancy rates. Again, you want to do it at the suburb level and type in that level. And essentially this gives you what the vacancy rates are in the local area. Now, historically, 3.4% isn't that high considering the last sort of 3 years. But when we go back in time, it is quite high. What you do want to see with vacancy is, sort of like really strong 1% or something like that. And essentially that means that, properties are just getting leased straight away as soon as they're listed. So 3.4% is a little bit high for me. It's not too crazy. Like if we jump into Sydney CBD right now, it is absolutely hectic. Yeah, so the vacancy in Sydney CBD is 16.2%, which is absolutely ridiculous. And that is obviously because of the COVID-19 thing that's happening. But yeah, that's a prime example of somewhere that I probably want to stay away from. Next thing, guys, is livability. Now, essentially, livability is just going to be from your old mate Google Maps. That's going to give you a good breakdown of what's happening in the area, distance from all that sort of stuff. So jump into Google Maps, do all your typical things. So Botany to CBD, you know, how long's the drive, how long's the walk, how long's the transport. It's all really good to figure out all that sort of stuff. How do you get there? What routes does it take? How long does it take? All that sort of stuff. So distance to CBD, distance to transport. So walking distance to transport, like how long does it take for someone to actually walk from, and if you zoom in really far, you know, do a specific location, it'll actually say, okay, you know, walking distance to that is going to be, it doesn't actually say here, but sometimes it does. But essentially, yeah, you can see how far it walks. Distance to schools, so you can look at all the schools in the local area. Most of the listing websites now actually give you that sort of school location. So if we go back to domain and click on something, hopefully it's going to validate what's going on here. Yeah, so school catchment zones. So essentially it gives you, you know, the distance away from these school catchment zones and all that sort of stuff. There's also some pretty good statistics in here, like this owner occupier renter, family single, which is kind of the stuff that we've already covered before, but yeah, pretty cool. So streetscape, essentially, if you're not in the area, I just purchased from here and I'm in Melbourne, so I don't know. Obviously, I used a buyer's agent, so he's helped me through the process. But you know, you can drop down and see, you know, how the area looks. You know, is there a really nice tree line? You know, what's going on in the area? Is there sort of too many of these apartments in the same location? Is it oversupplied in that sort of retrospect? How does the street look? Has it been you know, redone recently? Probably not. And then, you know, I just walk down the street like I was there and look what's around the corner. Look at what things look like. Look, you know, what do people's properties look like? Is the grass mowed? Is things well maintained? And that sort of gives you an understanding of how well people look after the particular area. Pretty stock standard there, but yeah, if you don't have access to get there yourself, either get someone you do know to go and have a look and check out the area, or use a buyer's agent, or you can go through Google Maps. It's just another alternative. Same thing again with all of the like cafes and restaurants and all that sort of stuff. So essentially, I'll just type in cafe into Google Maps, and it should pop up with, you know, all of the local cafes. So if I was to buy somewhere around here, which I haven't, but if I was, you know, you can see that there's all these different cafes in walking distance vicinity, and that's kind of what you want to repeat for restaurants, stores, amenities. Obviously there's nice viewing, so there's a lookout here. You've got the park here, and they're the sort of the amenities that you want to look for. Maybe even playgrounds, you know, for young families, all that sort of stuff. I would just be looking, you know, how far is the walking distance. There's no playgrounds here, but you know, there's a dog-friendly fenced garden over there too. So that's what you want to look at, guys. You want to look at lots of local amenities and all that sort of stuff as well. Next thing I look at is flight path. So Google has this really cool flight path thing where essentially it gives you the flight paths of all the major airports, and you can see here where planes are coming in and out, and where that sort of noise is going to be. So if we zoom in, although Botany is very close to Sydney CBD, it's not actually below a flight path, which is great news. So it sort of just cuts it out here. Obviously there will be a little bit of noise, I think so. That is one impactor, but it is not like directly below the flight path. Again, the next thing is aspect. So essentially with the aspect, you want a north-facing backyard, and you can only really look at that specific property. So if we go find one random property and try and find a floor plan, essentially, yeah, so this is a north-facing backyard. So what happens with, and how you can tell, is this little thing is facing north, and essentially what happens here is the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, or one or the other. I can't remember, it depends on what side of the hemisphere you live on. But essentially what happens is the sun is in your backyard all afternoon and all day. If you had the property facing this way, you'd have the sun in the front of the building, and you know, it's just not as nice in the evening to have the sun in the backyard. Plus there's plenty of, in this house in particular, there's plenty of sunlight that comes through these particular, you know, this is probably a sliding door and this is probably a window. So plenty of natural light inside. Yeah, and that's why you want a north-facing backyard. Street numbers, pretty interesting one here. I just chucked that in because a lot of people don't like certain numbers. A lot of people don't like the number 13. Not that it's a massive impactor and should be, you know, really considered like not to buy if it's a 13. If it's a great asset, you can still buy it if the house number is 13. But a lot of people don't like the number 13, and so when you purchase it later down the track, there might not be as much demand for people to buy that type of property because of the number. They think it's an unlucky number. So something else to take into consideration. Now we'll jump into supply, guys. So again, we're going to jump into that building profile. If you are buying in a street building, essentially here you want to be looking. This just gives you the structure building. So there's 33 units in here, 3 townhouses and 3 other. This is not the building profile that I purchased in. However, it is quite similar, but mine had only 24 in it. Now that's a little bit too many units for my liking. I like to generally stick to buildings that have 12 or less, but essentially the purchase was just too good for that to impact the score ridiculously. But yeah, essentially you want that 12 buildings or less within the same apartment block, and that just means that there's not, you know, in that same scenario where you had to sell properties dramatically, you know, there's not 100 different apartments on the market at the same time, and you know, you have to really reduce the price of your property to actually get a sale done. Essentially you're limiting that, and you want a scarce asset. You want something that's pretty rare, you want something that's unique, you want something that's individual, so that it does hold demand and has demand because of that scarcity. Now we'll jump into stock on market. So same sort of thing here, except looking at the suburb detail, you jump into the area detail altogether, and essentially this gives you a total breakdown of how many properties are on the market. Back into SQM research, this one has its own little thing as well, but essentially it's called total property listings. Now what we do here is just look at how many properties have been on the market, and they break it down to the number of days duration. So number of properties that have been on the market for under 30 days, 30 to 60 days, 60 to 90 days. Anything more than 60 to 90 days is probably frowned upon because it's just been sitting on the market for too long. It's not selling, it's either not priced correctly or no one's buying in that area. So you do want, you do want less properties in that specific category. Obviously, the less you have, or the more you have under 30 days is pretty good. It means that, you know, properties aren't sitting on the market for just as long. And essentially you can see this line over time here as well. So you can see that there was a lot of properties on the market sort of 2018, and there's a significantly less amount of properties on the market at the moment. You can also switch this to houses versus units, which is pretty cool. It just gives you a breakdown of how many different units there are on the market compared to houses. So there's 53 units on the market at the moment and 16 houses. So, you know, depending on what type of asset that you're buying or what type of dwelling that you're buying, you can sort of break that down and see this other statistics here. You know, if you're buying one unit in one market, in this particular market, you know, you're one of 53 units, which is really interesting to consider. The next one, guys, is unit versus houses. And essentially this is exactly the same place that we get it from and break it down. So I probably should have said that beforehand, but yeah, jump back into SQM research, jump back into total property listings, and you can get a breakdown of how many units versus houses are currently on the market. What I also like to do here is look for how many are total in that specific area. And second last thing under supply is land available. Now essentially it's a boots on the ground type of thing. You want to have a look around, see how much land is available in the immediate vicinity. I mean, I wouldn't want to be walking around on Google Maps for hours and hours to see how much land is available, but yeah, check how much land is available. You don't want lots of blocks of land available, because that essentially means that other people can just come and build new properties on there and devalue the value of your property. Again, that's the whole house and land estate sort of effect as well. So yeah, the best thing to do is just get an overview, see if there is much land available in Google Maps, and then get some local knowledge and someone with the boots on the ground to sort of walk around and see what is happening there. Is there going to be a lot of development, all that sort of stuff. And again, that moves into zoning. So, you know, is there going to be any zoning changes? A lot of people say that, you know, the biggest impact of immediate or sudden rises is a zoning change. So essentially, you know, a big block of your land can then get chopped up and built into multiple units. Big developers are going to come in and snap up the price of that land. They're going to pay a premium for it because they can build it and essentially build larger complexes on that and make a profit. Now, the other thing to consider is the Department of Planning. So although this isn't going to give you exact of what's going on. It does give you a bit of a breakdown of what potentially could happen, and it breaks down the planning in the local area. So jump on there, have a look what is happening in the area. If you do want specifics, I'd probably ring your local council or email your local council, and they'll be able to tell you if there is any zoning changes coming up. And that's it, guys, for this video. I didn't want to drag on for too long, but essentially that's the team and statistics side of my initial due diligence. In the next video, we'll delve into the actual physical asset due diligence, including the strata report and some interesting findings alongside my cash flow analysis. If you're keen for that video, don't forget to subscribe and smash the notification button so you don't miss it. I want to know what other things you guys do for your due diligence when buying a property. Leave it down in the comment section below. As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. These videos are just my opinion and are general in nature. It should never be considered as personal advice. And until next time, happy house hunting.